Welcome everybody to the part 2 of the lesson 5 of the module LTCC maximum entropy model in complex networks. Today we will cover maximum entropy model of generalized network, including multiplex networks and simplicial complex. So until now in this course, we have considered only simple networks. So network in which if node I interacts with node J, also J interacts with I, so there is no direction, and in which there is no weight and there are no tadpoles. But in real situation, you might have more type of network, including network with direction, the directed network, signed network, and network with a weight. So for instance, in an airport network, you might have as a weight the number of traveler for each airline route, or for phone call, how many people speak to each other in how long two people speak to each other in a typical day. And another kind of generalized network structure is network with feature of the node. So if you have metadata, and we have quite extensively covered that in lesson 4 and here in part 1 of lesson 5. So what happens if you have feature of the nodes that are known or that you want to infer? So given the time constraint, we will not be able now to cover maximum entropy ensemble or directed and weighted network ensemble. However, you will find information about that in the extra material in the module webpage. What we will cover here is more generalized network structure. And really, because recently it has been understood that in order to make the next further step forward in the understanding of complex system, is important to go behind the framework of networks. And these generalized network structure include multi-layer networks. They include simplicial complex and temporal networks. So in multi-layer networks, what you really capture is that in a complex system, any two nodes may be connected by interaction of different nature, different type, different connotation. So for instance, any two people in a social network might be interacting with each other via mobile phone, via email, or via chat. And these different networks constitute a different layer, or you can have different online social network, Facebook, LinkedIn, or you name it, WhatsApp, or you can have a lot of different situations in which the complex system that you are describing include interaction that have really different connotation. A simplicial complex and hypergraph are higher order network instead, where the interaction is not exclusively pairwise, but it can include 3-body and 4-body interaction. And temporal network are network in which the links have a timestamp. So the link can appear and disappear in time. This is very important, for instance, if you want to study face-to-face contact between people. And it's very important to know the duration of the contact, the typical distribution, the distribution of time between the establishment of one contact and the other. To some extent, temporal network can be also seen as a multi-layer network, in which, in fact, if you aggregate for different time windows, so for instance, the network of day 1, the network in day 2, the network in day 3, each day can be seen as a layer, and the network can be seen as a different type of multi-layer network, in which the layer indicates the time of each interaction. So here, given the time constraint, we will focus mostly on multi-layer networks and on a simplicial complex model. And I will follow a slightly different style of presentation respect to the previous lesson. It would be more similar to a research presentation than a real lesson in which I explain a bit of the detail of the maths, because you have learned the basic of mathematical entropy ensemble, so you might be able to appreciate already the use of this ensemble in this context. So let's start with multiplex network, and I will introduce maximum network, providing a general discussion about why they are useful and in which context we can consider multiplex networks. So multiplex networks have been initially studied by sociology to study social network like this social network of the Florentine families in the Renaissance period, where the Medici family was ruling the city. And here, in order to characterize the network of power between of this family, sociology have built this multiplex network where interaction can be business relation, but also marriage alliance. And typical question that have been addressed in this context is to try to consider have a measure of the centrality of some nodes to consider their importance in this network. But this is a quite a small multiplex networks, and nowadays we have much more extensive data set of multiplex networks, including, for instance, the full publication in the American Physical Society journal, which include more than 100 years of publication in physics in different subjects. So you can have a collaboration network between scientists in different topics, because each paper is characterized by topics that it covers, and then in each topics, in each field, you might have a different collaboration network, and some author might collaborate in more than one topic, so maybe present in more than one layer. So really, so for instance, one layer could be high energy physics, and one layer can be geophysics also. So practically, you can build this multi-layer network of collaboration of scientists in different topics, and you can start to study the similarity between this layer and build a network of network between this layer, and this way, in some sense, producing from the bottom up, from the evidence of the data, an understanding about how the field have evolved. Multi-layer networks are also very important in transportation systems, and in particular in the air transportation network that is very widely studied to study commuting pattern, the role in epidemic spreading, and so on. The airport network is actually a multi-layer network where each airline company offers only a subset of the flight connection. And if you look at different airline companies, you can have very different topology emerging, but the full commuting pattern needs to take account of all the layers together. So multi-layer networks are also used in climate research, and there is this very fascinating paper by Dogens and the group of Jürgen Kurs, in which they build a multi-layer climate network by looking at the geopotential at different altitude. And in biology also, multi-layer are extremely important. If you look inside the cell, traditionally people have looked at just one type of interaction, the metabolic interaction, the signal interaction, but actually you cannot have a real understanding of the cell if you don't embrace a very comprehensive approach, including all the interaction, but at the same time distinguishing between the different type of interaction. And this is the approach of the multi-layer approach. So every time you have a network like this, where you have a set of nodes and interaction of different type, different connotation, you can disentangle and have it as a multiplex network in which each layer corresponds to the interaction among the node of the same type. And multiplex networks are really important also in neuroscience, both for understanding data at the macroscopic data at the level of a region of the brain, and also understanding data microscopically at the cellular level, because neurons interact via chemical synapses, but also via gap junctions, so via chemical but also electrical connection, providing a multiplex with two layers. And actually, in this worm, C. elegans, that has a fully annotated brain, it is possible also to not only to have synaptic and gap junction layer, but also have additional layer, because neurons can transmit and receive signals given by neuropeptide or monoamide that are small molecule, and this leads additional layer in this multiplex representation data. And I point you to this beautiful paper by the Cambridge group. So really this is to give you an idea that and to stress the importance of multi-layer network if you want to characterize, model, and predict a complex system. And really you need to make a step forward with respect to what you have learned just with the network and embrace a multi-layer perspective. So, and in this book that I published recently by Oxford University Press, you find a kind of pedagogical presentation. So in the first two chapters are just devoted to single network, but then the rest of the graph is the book cover quite comprehensively the active research that's been done in recent years in multi-layer network. So multi-layer network can be quite complex. They might include network of networks, so include interaction within each layer and between each layer. And in network of networks, you have a lot of degree of freedom how to place these interlinks, so these links among different layers. So you can have interlinks place, you know, every node having just in layer alpha equal to 3, having just one node in layer alpha equal to 1, and just one link in layer alpha to 2, and forming a triangle of interaction. But these interlinks can be placed randomly, so leading to loops of interlinks that are longer than just a triangle. And you can have instead one-to-one mapping of the node, or one-to-many mapping of a node of one layer to node of other layers, and so on. So there is a quite large range, variety of topology in network of network, and this leads to very strong effect in dynamics. But here what I want to cover is the most simple structure of multi-layer network, which are multiplex. And I want to show you how multiplex networks already encode a lot of information more than the single layer taken in isolation. So in multiplex networks, we have already introduced informally, a multiplex network is formed by M layer, and each layer is a network defined on a set of V of n nodes, and each node is represented in every network by a corresponding replica node. So for instance, this is node 1 is John Smith, and John Smith is represented in the email communication network, in the mobile phone, and in the chat communication network. Or you can have a transportation network, so this can be Oxford Street, tube station, Oxford Street train station, and so on. So you can have different representation for multiplex networks. So you might want to aggregate the layer and then just distinguish between the different type of interaction, like in a colored graph, or you might want to introduce these interlinks, so these links connecting nodes in different layers, and also attribute a different meaning to it, so to them. So for instance, if one layer is the bus transportation network and one layer is the tube transportation network, you might want to associate a cost to switch from one Oxford Street tube and Oxford Street bus station. But then at the structural level, leaving what is captured by the structural level, the multiplex structure is captured by just the network in layer 1 and the network in layer 2 and eventually in layer 3 and so on, because these interlinks are placed deterministically among replica nodes. So a multiplex network can be just described as a vector of network where each network is among the same set of vertices and is characterized by the different type of edges. So like in this way, you have a representation of the multiplex network as a vector of adjacency matrix. You can think this as an object with 3 indices, ij indicating if I is connected to j, and then a layer an index alpha indicating in what layer you are, what layer you are considering. So this can be in some sense considered as a tensor, but it's not really a tensor because you cannot allow for rotation of the indices, rotation of the tensor. So you have the element iej of the adjacency matrix alpha is 1 or 0, and is 1 if and only if node I is linked to node j in layer alpha. So this structure seems very simple, so it's just a vector of adjacency matrix, but still capture a lot of feature and correlation. And one important type of correlation is link overlap. So link overlap refer to the tendency of a pair of nodes to be connected in more than one layer. And this is the case of the multi-layer air transportation network, where we plotted only the flight connection operated by more than one airline company. So as you see, this is a very large part of the connection in Europe. So this is a very significant feature of this multiplex network, is that there is this redundancy, and the redundancy is encoded in the fact that popular flight connections are operated by more than one airline company. So in order to characterize link overlap, you have a total measure of total overlap between layer alpha and layer alpha prime, which is defined as the total number of links that are present, at the same time in layer alpha and layer prime, meaning that this is the total number of pair of nodes connected both in layer alpha and layer alpha prime. And then you have the local overlap, or I alpha alpha prime, that instead is for each node I, it characterizes how many connections are connected both in layer alpha and in layer alpha prime. So how many friends of node I speak both with him by email and mobile phone, for instance. So a naive way to characterize this link overlap could be just to characterize the multiplicity of link overlap. So for each pair of nodes, how many interaction, in how many layers they are connected. And this is a number, for instance, 4 in this case, but is a number in which there is no distinction between the different valence, the different nature of the interaction. So for instance, if you have 2 colleagues in a workplace, one interaction can be exchanging a set of email, one interaction could be going in vacation together. And of course, the 2 sets of interaction that you don't have the same valence. So you want to distinguish between the different type of connection that are connecting any 2 nodes. And in order to do this, you need to define multi-links. So multi-links extend the notion of links in a multi-layer multiplex network scenario, in which practically it's not like in a single network. In a single network, you have 2 nodes either connected or not connected. In a multiplex network, you have 2 nodes can be connected in multiple ways because they can be connected in layer 1, but not in layer 2, in layer 2, but not in layer 1, or they can be connected in both. So in order to capture that, we will say that you have, for instance, node 1 and node 2, and they are connected in layer 1 and in layer 2. We would say they are connected by multilink 1, 1. Node 2 and 3, they are connected in layer 1, but not in layer 2. So we will say we are connected by multilink 1, 0, and so on exhaustively. So practically in an unweighted multiplex network, node I is connected to node J by multilink vector M, and this vector is a vector of capital M component, 1 for each layer, and M alpha is equal to the element ij of the element ij of the adjacency matrix alpha. So it will tell you if I and j is connected or not in layer alpha. But here really we are considered of the class of multilinks. So we can consider, for instance, all the interaction in which the 2 connected nodes are connected only in layer 1, or all the interaction in which the 2 connected nodes are connected both in layer 1 and in layer 2. With this definition of multilinks, we can construct the multi-adjacency matrix. So in the case of 2 layer, the multi-adjacency matrix A vector M will have element ij vector M, indicating if node I and node J are connected by multilink of type vector M. So in 2 layer, we will have Aij 1, 0, we will be equal to 1 if and only if node I is linked to node J in layer 1, but not in layer 2. Ai0, 0, 1 if node I is connected to node J in layer 2, but not in layer 1. And Aij 1, 1 if node I is connected to node J both in layer 1 and in layer 2. And of course, if you sum all the multi-adjacency matrix entry of every type of multilinks, and you take always the same, the element between the same pair of node, you should have that only one type of multilinks connect any 2 nodes. So only one of these quantities is equal to 1 and all the other are 0. So we can express the multi-adjacency matrix in terms of the adjacency matrix of the network in this way. And really we can convert, we can go, and if we want to consider a multiplex network, we can consider the vector of adjacency matrix, but we can also consider the vector of multi-adjacency matrix. And this seems a little bit cumbersome, but is actually useful to define the multi-degree sequence and the multi-degree of a node, and the multi-degree of a node I is ki vector m of a node I is defined as the number of multi-links vector m incident to it. So it's defined as the sum of the row or sum of the column of this multi-adjacency matrix. So practically, if you have two layers, the multi-degree 1, 0 is the number of friends of node I connected in layer 1, but not in layer 2. The multi-degree 0, 1 of node I is the number of friends connected in layer 2, but not in layer 1. And the multi-degree 1, 1 is the local overlap, so it's the number of friends connected both in layer 1 and in layer 2. So these multi-links can be considered as motifs. So in a network, you can count how many multi-links do you have among the nodes of your multiplex network, and count this number and its significance respect to a null model. And in this way, you can extract information from the multiplex network structure. And this is what is done, for instance, in this model for the multi-layer connectome of C. elegans. Or you can look at multi-degree, and this is a paper in which it was shown that the multi-degree can reveal the role of different role of financial sector in financial crisis. What we have done is we have considered also weighted multiplex networks in which every layer, maybe you have a citation in one layer between author, and in another layer you have collaboration between author, and each layer is weighted. So in one author you might consider in how many papers two authors have collaborated with each other, and in the other layer you might want to see how many times an author cite another author. So the citation is also directed. So, and in this weighted multiplex network, you can consider this multi-strand. So the sum of the weight of multi-link vector m in layer alpha, and you might want to see if how this correlate with the multi-degree. And if you have this multi-strand, you really condition on the presence of the given of connection in another layer. So what we have done is we have focused on this very large data set of citation and collaboration duplex network in which cite each other and collaborate with each other. And we have considered the multi-strand versus the multi-degree. And we have shown that actually, if you consider multi-link with a link overlap, in which, how many, what is the multi-strand versus multi-degree over multi-link 1-1, so over what is the pattern followed, the citation pattern followed by authors in citing the paper of their collaborator, and what is the pattern of citing of authors citing the paper of authors that are not their collaborator. And we found that this regression have different beta coefficient, indicating that there is a different trend, different statistical ways in which people cite their collaborator respect to the way they cite their non-collaborator. And in particular, there is a more significant trend of people tend to cite more the apps with whom they have collaborated than the apps that have not collaborated with them. And this is somewhat intuitive result, but there is really a very strong proof of concept that actually with a multiplex network, you can extract more information than just with a single layer in isolation, because it allows you to, in some sense, to condition on the presence of the overlap, and therefore to extract an information that would be very difficult to extract where you're given only the citation network. So given this, we might want to model multiplex networks, and there are different ways we can proceed to do that. So on one side, we might want to have uncorrelated multiplex networks. So we might want to draw each layer independently with a given model for a single network. So we can draw, a configuration model with different degree sequence in different layers as we want. A more interesting approach is to consider correlated multiplex network ensemble, in which the layers are not drawn independently. Indeed, we need, if we just use uncorrelated approach, we have a sparse network in each layer, we will get a negligible link overlap, while the link overlap is a feature of occurring very often in a lot of data, not only just this airport network data, but a lot of social network data. For instance, you might notice your friends in online social network in different platforms might have a strong overlap. So in order to to have a model that preserves the required level of link overlap, we really need multi-links. So we can enforce the multi-degree sequence, not just the degree sequence. And so we can build canonical, but also microcanonical ensemble, in which in the canonical ensemble, we fix the expected multi-degree sequence of every node. And the ensemble that we get as a Gibbs measure defined on the multi-adjacency matrix that takes this form, where now we have introduced a Lagrangian multiplier lambda I vector m for every constraint, one for each node, one for each node and for each type of multilink. So when we calculate the marginal, we get this familiar expression, but now, so in the denominator, we have the term depending on the Lagrangian multiplier fixing the expected multi-degree sequence of node I, the expected multi-degree sequence of node J, but now we need to normalize, and the normalization should take into account the fact that we might not have any non-trivial multilink, so we might have only the multilink 0, 0, or we might have any of the different type of multilinks. So this is not just one type of multilinks, but we can have many different type of multilinks. So we need to sum over all the multilinks that are different from 0, 0 here, of similar term of this type. So if we introduce a structural cutoff, this marginal probability factorize, and here we should have vector m, and they just are proportional to the multi-degree of node I vector m, multi-degree of node j vector m. And we really can construct the code. We put, for a configuration model of multilinks, we put some stubs. So for instance, these red stubs, which are type 1, 1, which are present in layer 1 and in layer 2. Then we have black stubs of type 1, 0 that are only present in layer 1, and then the green stubs that are only present in layer 2. And then we this define our multi-degree sequence, and then we match the stub of randomly the stub of the same color. Or we can have a canonical multiplex ensemble in which we calculate the marginal probability that node I and node J are connected by a multilink vector n, and then we draw a die for every node I and J. We draw a die, and with probability pi J vector m, we draw a multilink vector m. So we put a link in every layer where m alpha is equal to 1. And of course, it is not surprise after all what we learn in this module. Here, the number of constraints is extensive, so is larger than is order n, and therefore the two ensemble, the canonical and the microcanonical network ensemble, are not statistically equivalent, and they differ from a quantity that is the entropy of large deviation. Interesting, as a note, we observed that actually we can have spatial multiplex networks in which we might have that each layer is drawn randomly, independently, but each layer is conditioned on the same latent variable. So for instance, every layer is spatial in some sense, and it favors a connection between nodes that are close in space. So in this model, also if every layer is drawn independently but conditioned on the latent variable, then we can have a link overlap. So if there is a common latent variable that affect the ensemble in all the layers, then this can generate as an alternative mechanism that can generate link overlap in these systems. So this concludes the work that I want to present on multiplex networks, and of course there is quite an extensive research and question open in this field. Now I want to tell you a little bit more about ensemble of simplicial complexes. And simplicial complexes are higher order networks. So networks that are not just encoding pairwise interaction, it's just not formed by node and links, but encode also interaction between 3 nodes or 4 nodes and so on. So there is a number of data sets that are characterized by higher order interaction. And this includes brain data, in which you can have different regions of the brain, and in which you want to distinguish between a triangle formed just by 3 links, 3 pairwise interaction, in which every pair of region is correlated pairwise, or you can have a 3-body interaction when there is an activation at the same time of the 3 regions of the brain, and you indicate that with a filled triangle. Also in protein interaction network, you can have many body interactions. So in the cell, protein form complexes formed by more than 2 different types of proteins in general connecting with each other, and only in this aggregated form they can perform a given function in the cell. So really, although the binding can be pairwise, then the interaction is many-body, in the sense that only if this set of 2 or more type of proteins interact with each other, then it's possible for the complex to perform a function. Also in social networks, there are a number of many-body interactions. So if you think of face-to-face interaction in a party, you find find very usually groups of more than 2 people, 3 or 4 people forming and chatting and discussing together. And in collaboration network, both in movie collaboration network, you can have moving with more than 2 main actors, or in science you can have papers with more than 2 authors. So you can have interaction that are really going behind pairwise interaction. So these higher order network include hypergraph. Hypergraph are formed by hyperedge. So 2 hyperedge is just a link. A 3 hyperedge is formed by 3 body interaction, and 4 hyperedge is formed by 4 body interaction, like a click of size 4. And this M hyperedge really indicates the interaction between these M nodes. And an hypergraph is a set of node and hyperedge. So for instance, here you have an hypergraph indicated by the set of hyperedge that are between these 6 nodes, and you have interaction between 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and then you have a triangle interaction 1, 2 and 3, but you see you don't have any interaction between 2 and 3 alone. So you can have the triangle without all the links belonging to it. So simplices are used in the framework of simplicial complexes. So a d-dimensional simplex is a set of d+1 node. So a 0 simplex is a node, a 1 simplex is a link, a 2 simplex is a triangle, a 3 simplex is a tetrahedron. And a simplex indicates the interaction between these nodes, but also very importantly, simplices admit a topological and geometrical interpretation. So when you use simplices and simplicial complex, then you can use the tool of discrete geometry and discrete topology to understand this structure. So the phases of a simplex are the simplices formed by a subset of their nodes. So for instance, if you have a tetrahedron, the phases are 4 nodes, 6 links, and 4 triangle. So a simplicial complex is a higher order network, which is formed by a set of simplices and has the additional feature that is closed under the inclusion of the phase of every simplex. So if a simplex alpha belongs to the simplicial complex, all the phases also belong to the simplicial complex. So if you have 1, 2, 3, then the triangle 1, 2, 3, then you have all 1, 2, and 3, the single node, and then you have each pair of link 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, 1. So for any given network, it is possible to construct a simplicial complex doing the operation of clicks complex. So you consider every triple of connected nodes to be forming a triangle, every 4 click to form a tetrahedron, and so on. And if you have a network, a simplicial complexes in which you know which kind of higher order interaction you are there, but you take only its skeleton, only the interaction, the pairwise interaction, then you are reduced to a network. So you can go from a simplicial complex to a network just by taking just simply the pairwise interaction present in the simplicial complex. So a simplicial complex has a dimension, and the dimension of the simplicial complex is the largest dimension of its simplices. So for instance, here you have the higher dimensional simplex present in this network as dimension d equal to 2. So and the simplices, all the simplices which are not faces of other simplices, can be called facet. So a pure simplicial complex is a simplicial complex whose facets have all the same dimension, and is the dimension of the simplicial complex. So for instance, a d-dimensional simplicial complex is formed by d simplices and all their faces. So in this case, a simplicial complex can be characterized by a tensor of d+1 indices. For instance, here you just have simplicial complex formed by triangle and their face, and this is characterized by an adjacency matrix that is a tensor, an adjacency tensor which has 3 indices indicating if R, S, and P form a triangle or not, and if this triangle belongs to the simplicial complex. So, so there is an example of pure simplicial complex that is formed by d-dimensional simplices and their face, or a case of not pure simplicial complex. So a simplicial complex formed by triangle, but also having a link which doesn't belong to any triangle. So this link will be a facet of this simplicial complex, but will have dimension 1, while all the other facets will have dimension 2. And in this case, the simplicial complex is not pure. An important quantity for simplicial complex to define is the generalized degree, that generalize the notion of degree of a node for a simplicial complex. So the generalized degree d delta of a face alpha is a number of d-dimensional simplices incident to a delta face alpha. So K20 alpha is the number of triangle incident to a node alpha. K21 alpha is the number of triangle incident to a link alpha. So if you want to know the generalized degree of the node, you have a d equal 2-dimensional simplex, pure simplicial complex. You might sum all the indices except I of the adjacency tensor, and if you want to know the generalized degree of the link, you might sum on the third index. So here, for instance, for node 3, you will have 4 triangle incident to a node 3, so you have a generalized degree of the node that is 4, and for link 1, 3, you will have a generalized degree which is 3, because there are 3 triangle incident to this link 1, 3. And these generalized degrees of pure simplicial complex satisfy a combinatorial relation, which is quite neat and can be defined using the adjacency tensor. You can also find in the incidence number, which is for the d-1 face of a pure d-dimensional simplex, is the generalized degree -1. So for instance, this link 1, 3 has incidence number 2. And this is quite useful because in order to have discrete manifold, you have a necessary condition that this incidence number should take value either 0 or 1. So a manifold, for instance, a 2-dimensional manifold, a discrete manifold is something that is homomorphic to a surface. So for instance, in this case, and for this you need that the link is incident at most to 2 triangle. And while this other structure here, which can happen in modeling complex system, has a fin. So in this link, there are 3 simplices incident to it. So it doesn't describe a given, doesn't approximate a given smooth surface, but it has a branching. So it is very important to distinguish between these different scenario. In particular, if you want to try to define measure for curvature for this object. We constructed a simplicial complex model Both non-equilibrium try to describe a merger geometry and equilibrium with maximum entropy model, extending the notion of the configuration model and the canonical ensemble to simplicial complexes. And this is what I would like to tell you about. So we consider a model for pure simplicial complex in which we describe the simplicial complex with a tensor a mu, where mu indicates is a set of d+1 indices, and in this case a d-dimensional simplex mu. And the tensor mu is 1 if the d-dimensional simplex is in the simplicial complex and 0 otherwise. So we consider as constraint the generalized degree of the node. So we place some stubs on the node indicating how many, for these simplices, for instance, how many triangles we want the node to belong to. And then we match the stubs forming a three-body interaction for a two-dimensional simplex or higher order interaction for higher dimensional simplicial complex. So here, for instance, node 2, 3, and 4 are matched in this three-body interaction, so they are connected in the simplicial complex by a triangle. And for any distribution of the generalized degree, you can have different simplicial complex forming, and the logarithm of this typical number of simplicial complex that you can form is indicated by the entropy of the ensemble. So the ensemble associated to each simplicial complex a probability, and given this probability, we can associate the entropy indicating the logarithm of the total typical number of simplicial complex in the ensemble. So as constraint, as we say, we fix the sequence of expected generalized degree of the node. So for each node I, we consider, we sum over all different, the adjacency tensor over all the other D indices, where the indices are constitute a distinguishable set of D indices, so where J is less than K and is less than R. So the entropy associated, the probability associated for each simplicial complex is a probability associating to the adjacency tensor, and it has this familiar Gibbs measure where every Lagrangian multiplier lambda I is the Lagrangian multiplier enforcing the generalized degree of the node. So the probability of the simplex can be expressed in this familiar way, where now here in the denominator, we have the sum of all Lagrangian multiplier of node R belonging to the simplicial complex. And if we allow for a structural cutoff, so for the generalized degree be bounded by a term that depends on n in this way, then this marginal probability factor rise in the generalized degree of the node belonging to the simplicial complex. So if we want just to check in the equal to 1 how the marginal probability looks like, and we recover the expression familiar for a network with the structural cutoff scaling as square root of n. If we want to look at the first non-trivial case of d equal to 2, we find the product here of 3 Lagrangian multiplier enforcing that the generalized degree of node I, J, and R when we look at the probability of a triangle between these 3 nodes. And if in the presence of a structural cutoff, this probability that in general is not factorizing to I, J, and R, in presence of this structural cutoff, factorize in the product of the generalized degree of node I, J, and R. And here the structural cutoff is can allow us to look at a larger generalized degree respect to a simple graph, and we can go up to n to 2/3. So interesting, we can have also the microcanonical version and the canonical version, and they are not equivalent because when we enforce the generalized degree sequence here, we are enforcing an extensive number of constraints. And so this is not surprising given all what I've been saying in the previous lecture. So we can really construct algorithm to generate this configuration model. So we have the nodes with the stubs indicating their generalized degree that we want to achieve. And then we have auxiliary nodes indicating, for instance, here in case of D equal two-dimensional simplex, the triangle. And then we match the stub of the triangle to the match of the node. And so we start with the first one, then we second one, third one, until the full stubs, all the stubs are matched. And of course, there are some illegal matching. And for instance, we cannot have two triangles connecting the same triple of nodes, or we cannot have one triangle with two stubs connect the same type of node. So we have to be careful not to end up in this undesired situation. But really, we can construct the code, and our code is available in my GitHub page. So then we can play the combinatorics, and we can find the asymptotic expression for the number of simplicial complexes with generalized degree of the node. And we find this quite cumbersome looking expression, but here interesting every term can be explained combinatorically in terms of this matching of the stub which I described. And interesting, if we look at the limit d equal to 1, we recover the Bender and Canfield formula. So this model have natural correlation, even more significant than the natural correlation in a network. So you can compare here the d equal to 1 case on a network with the d equal to 2 and d equal to 3 case. And most importantly, these correlations are quite severe if we look at the clustering coefficient, average clustering coefficient of node of generalized degree kappa versus kappa. And here we see that in d equal to 2 and in d equal to 2 and d equal to 3, we find a very significant correlation of this feature that was one of the features that was studied at the beginning in real data set and is observed in a variety of data sets. So finally, final remarks. So we have constructed a pure simplicial complex. How can we construct an hypergraph like that? So the easy solution is that we can use a multiplex construction. So we can start with a pure one-dimensional simplicial complex, so a network, for instance, generated with the configuration model in one layer. And then we can generate a pure two-dimensional simplicial complex in which we retain only the facet of higher dimension. We retain only the triangles, for instance. And then we can consider the hypergraph formed by the aggregation of these two layers, so formed by the links in the first layer and the triangle in the second layer. And if we want, we can have another layer which will be three-body interaction and so on. So here we close the loop and we see how we can use a multiplex construction to go from simplicial complex to hypergraph modeling. So in final remarks, so in this lecture, we have covered maximum entropy ensemble, covering both multiplex network and simplicial complex. And you have might look at all the power of the method that we have developed in order to capture this generalized network ensemble. So we reach this first conclusion of the last lesson. So these are the references, of course, my book, Multi-Layer Network, and this article with my student Owen Courtney on generalized network structure. This is the first article in which I introduce multi-links. This is an article on weighted multiplex networks with Giulia Menchetti and large collaboration of people in QML and in Bologna. And this is a paper with Arda Alu, which was my student, on spatial multiplex networks. So concluding here the set of lessons, in this module we have covered several lessons going from the simple definition of a network and the maximum entropy principle to the basic of what is, how can we construct network ensemble, microcanonical and canonical, and how can we include latent variable and then define spatial and block models. And finally, today we have also looked at how we can use these to treat generalized network structure that are very active research field on this subject. So with this, I reach my conclusion. Maximum entropy network ensemble provide an information theory framework to construct an unbiased null model of network and generalized network with given set of constraints. They can be used to partially to reconstruct partial data of network, and they encode the entropy of this ensemble, encode the information content present in this constraint. So I hope you enjoy the model and you find interesting. I want to mention that there are a number of open questions. For instance, where do you take the constraint? Of course, if you start from data, you might want to take the constraint from observation of actual data that you have seen. But then you might notice some trend of different data sharing similarities, similar property, and you might want to understand by information theory tool where this universality comes from. And this is a subject of a research work that we're recently doing with Filippo Radicchi and other collaborators. And so there is a lot of open question, and I hope that this module is a nice introduction to this very lively research field on the topic. Thank you so much for your attention.